The Galactic Council had always prided itself on being the ultimate authority in the galaxy. Representatives from hundreds of species gathered every few cycles to debate, negotiate, and settle disputes that could otherwise spark chaos. The chamber was massive, filled with strange technologies and exotic creatures, each one looking completely different from the next. Some floated, some had multiple arms, others had translucent bodies that shimmered in colors no human eye could fully describe. But despite all their differences, every member of the council shared a single belief. They were smarter, stronger, and far more experienced than humans. The humans, in contrast, had never really been respected in these halls. They were curious, resilient, and stubborn, but to most alien species, they were simply unpredictable. Humans had emerged from a planet the galaxy considered dangerous, a world full of brutal predators, deadly storms, and environmental extremes that would have destroyed any other species. Yet humans survived, and not just survived, they thrived. They built civilizations, explored space, and developed technology in ways that the Council found chaotic, almost reckless. Still, none of that mattered today. The meeting began like any other. Alarms and lights blinked softly across the chamber. Holograms floated above the floor, displaying maps of disputed territories and trade routes. A species known for its 6 heads and glowing eyes spoke first. Its voice echoed mechanically through the hall, each head speaking in perfect synchronization. Human activity has been reported near the Lorian border. They have ignored multiple warnings. This cannot continue. We must act. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Some species nodded, others hissed, but all eyes eventually turned toward the humans. The humans did not respond immediately. They sat quietly, a small delegation in the middle of a massive room filled with beings who could crush their fleets in seconds. Their faces were calm, unreadable. There was no fear, no anger, no excitement. Just quiet, steady eyes that seemed to measure everything in the room. The council debated. Hours passed. Charts were analyzed. Reports were read aloud. Humans, the representatives said, were reckless. They were dangerous. They could not be trusted to follow the galaxy's rules. By the time the debate reached the vote, the council had already decided what it wanted: to formally condemn Earth and declare war if necessary. It was a gesture designed to show strength, to make the galaxy believe that no one, especially not humans, could defy the council without consequences. When the final vote was cast, the decision was unanimous. A declaration of war against humanity was announced. Some species cheered. Others looked on with satisfaction, thinking the humans would have no choice but to comply. The humans did not react. They remained seated, their expressions calm, almost serene. Then something happened that would be remembered across the galaxy for centuries. Without a single word, the human delegation stood up. Slowly, deliberately, they walked toward the exit. Their movements were confident, but measured, precise, yet casual, as if they were leaving a small meeting rather than the most powerful hall in the galaxy. The chamber fell silent. Every being stopped talking. Every hologram flickered nervously. And still, the humans walked out. It was not an angry walk. It was not a walk of defiance in the traditional sense. It was almost indifferent, but the message was clear. Humans had heard the declaration. They understood it. And they had made a choice. The most powerful council in the galaxy, which believed itself untouchable, had just witnessed the quiet confidence of a species it thought it could intimidate. Outside the chamber, the humans gathered in their own small space. No one spoke immediately. Some of the council members had expected screams, arguments, perhaps even desperate pleas. There was none of that. Instead, the humans looked at each other, understanding what had just happened. They were being declared enemies. But this was not new to them. Humanity had faced challenges that no other species could imagine. They had survived famine, disease, and the merciless environment of their home planet. They had faced predators that could kill them in an instant. And now they faced a council that believed itself stronger simply because it had more experience and technology. One human finally spoke. "They don't understand us," they said quietly. No one disagreed. No one needed to. The reality was simple. Humans were not predictable. They had never been predictable. And that made them dangerous, not because they wanted war, but because they could survive it in ways the council could not imagine. Back in the council chamber, rumors began to spread. Some species whispered about the human silence, trying to interpret what it meant. Were they afraid? Were they plotting? Were they ignoring the council out of arrogance? Each theory was more alarming than the last. None of the council members realized the truth. Humans did not need to plot. They had always been ready. Survival had been ingrained in them through countless generations. War was not new to humans. It was a reality they had prepared for, even when no one else thought it necessary. As hours turned into days, the effects of the declaration began to unfold. Patrols sent to monitor human activity reported unusual results. Sensors picked up fleeting signals, then nothing. Communications went unanswered. Colonies near human-controlled space stopped transmitting routine updates. Some small species reported strange sightings, shadows moving faster than the eye could follow, objects appearing and disappearing in the blink of an eye. Every report increased the unease among council members. Historians began to speak up, trying to remind the council of a truth that had been ignored for too long. Humans evolved on a death world, one historian said. They faced constant danger. Their environment shaped them. They learned to think, adapt, and survive where any other species would have perished. But the council had long dismissed such warnings. They thought humans' chaotic history was a weakness. Now, slowly, doubt began to creep in. For the humans, the declaration of war changed nothing in their daily lives. They returned to their research, to their ships, to the quiet preparation that had always defined them. But underneath that calm, there was focus, discipline, and an understanding that the galaxy had underestimated them. Humans did not seek conflict. They did not crave power. But when threatened, they became something the galaxy had never faced before. A force that could not easily be predicted, controlled, or destroyed. And so, the first part of this story ends. Not with a battle, but with a quiet warning. The Galactic Council had declared war on humanity, thinking it was a simple matter of politics. But they had underestimated the human strength, their adaptability, and their history. The chamber had witnessed their calm defiance, and the galaxy had already begun to feel the ripple effects of that confidence. In the end, the humans had not shouted, they had not threatened, they had simply walked out. But that single action spoke louder than any weapon, any fleet, or any law. It was a message that would echo through time. Underestimate humanity at your own peril. And for the Council, it was only the beginning of a mistake they would come to regret for generations. Days passed after the humans had quietly walked out of the council chamber, and yet the galaxy had barely begun to understand the consequences of that single act. The declaration of war, meant to intimidate, had sown confusion instead. Patrols sent to human space returned with alarming reports, or worse, returned empty-handed. Systems that had been reliably active for decades suddenly went silent. Communication signals disappeared, and even automated probes sent to monitor human activity failed to return any coherent data. The council members started to grow anxious. At first, they tried to rationalize it. Perhaps the humans were hiding, they thought, retreating to some secret base or planet. Perhaps they were gathering intelligence, preparing to respond in a minor way that would teach the council a lesson without escalating the conflict too far. But as reports continued to pour in, it became clear humans were operating on a scale no one had expected. They were not hiding. They were moving, adapting, and observing. And every movement was calculated in a way that confounded even the most. Advanced sensors. A delegation of scientists and analysts was convened. They pored over every scrap of information the patrols had collected. Even the most optimistic interpretations only made them more uneasy. Shadowy objects appeared in the far reaches of human-controlled space, moving at speeds that defied known physics. Settlements that had been thought vulnerable were suddenly reinforced in ways the Council had not predicted. And most unsettling of all, there was no indication of panic or overreaction from the humans themselves. They were calm, methodical, and terrifyingly precise. Across the galaxy, whispers began to spread about the human species. Stories that had been dismissed as exaggeration now gained credibility. Traders and explorers reported strange encounters. A scout ship returning from the outskirts of human space described witnessing a fleet that seemed to disappear and reappear at will. Another report described a small human colony with defenses that could neutralize an entire attack without firing. A single weapon directly at the enemy. Each account painted the same picture. Humans were unlike anything the galaxy had ever faced. Meanwhile, Council historians began digging into the human past, trying to find some explanation for this strange behavior. What they uncovered made many of them uneasy. Humans, they realized, had evolved on a planet that was hostile to life itself. From the very beginning, they had faced impossible challenges. Predators that hunted in packs, extreme weather that could destroy entire regions in hours, and natural disasters that reshaped their world without warning. Every generation survived, only because they learned, adapted, and outsmarted the dangers around them. This history, previously dismissed as irrelevant, suddenly seemed critical. Humans had not just survived, they had thrived in conditions that no other species could endure. They had learned resilience, cunning, and a kind of instinctive problem-solving that could not be taught in a classroom or calculated in simulations. And now, in the calm silence that followed the Council's declaration of war, that very resilience was beginning to manifest on a galactic scale. Patrol reports grew more alarming. One fleet sent to monitor human activity near the Orion sector vanished entirely, leaving behind no debris, no distress signal, and no trace of what had happened. A second fleet was attacked, but the engagement was unlike any battle the Council had ever recorded. The human ships did not fire indiscriminately. They avoided destruction where possible, and focused only on neutralizing threats with surgical precision. Yet the outcome was devastating. Over half of the attacking fleet was rendered inoperative, not through brute force, but through strategy and ingenuity that left Council observers baffled. The Council convened emergency meetings. Panic began to seep in. Some species wanted immediate retaliation, hoping that a show of strength would intimidate humanity into submission. Others suggested negotiation, fearing that any escalation could lead to total annihilation. And still, a few voices, small and cautious, reminded the Council of the humans' history, the Death World survivors, the species that had endured everything and still thrived. But those voices were mostly ignored. The majority believed in technology, in numbers, in strategy. They believed that humans were dangerous, yes, but ultimately predictable. The humans, however, continued their silent expansion, not with violence, but with intelligence. Sensors picked up colonies being fortified, supply, lines being improved, and communication networks being optimized. Every action was purposeful, every move considered. Humans were not preparing to conquer, they were preparing to survive, and, if necessary, defend themselves in a way that the galaxy could not anticipate. In one particularly telling incident, a small alien delegation attempted to approach a human settlement, hoping to test their defenses. What they found was astonishing. Automated systems had detected their approach hours in advance. Defensive measures were activated, but they were not aggressive. The delegation was blocked, guided, and eventually forced to retreat without anyone being harmed. It was a display of calculated restraint. The humans had the power to destroy, but they chose not to. This was the defining moment that sent shivers through the galaxy. Humans were not just deadly. They were measured in their deadly actions. Back at the Council, tension rose to an almost unbearable level. The initial confidence that had allowed them to declare war was gone. Analysts scrambled to model human behavior, but every prediction failed. Humans adapted too quickly, responded too cleverly, and thought too differently. No existing algorithms, no experience, and no precedent could account for the way they moved and operated. It was as if humans had an instinct that no one else in the galaxy possessed, a sixth sense honed over millennia that allowed them to predict threats, adapt instantly, and survive against impossible odds. Stories began to circulate among traders, explorers, and even ordinary citizens. Tales of humans moving faster than the sensors could track, of colonies surviving impossible attacks, of fleets appearing in places no one expected. All of this created a sense of awe, fear, and fascination. Even species that had previously laughed at humanity now whispered in hushed tones about the Death World survivors, the species that could not be beaten by logic, numbers, or conventional tactics. The Council attempted to maintain control, but the confidence that had allowed them to declare war in the first place was gone. A growing fear took root. The humans had not yet struck. They had not even retaliated. And yet, the knowledge of what humans were capable of was spreading like wildfire. The galaxy was beginning to realize that a species shaped by struggle, danger, and survival instinct was not to be underestimated. For the humans themselves, the unfolding events were nothing new. They had expected challenges, and they had prepared for them long before anyone in the Council could have imagined. Their strategies were precise, their defenses efficient, and their adaptability unmatched. They did not act recklessly. They did not seek vengeance. They simply did what humans had always done: face challenges head-on, adapt, survive, and ensure that the next generation would be ready for whatever came next. By the end of this period, the truth became clear. The galaxy had made a monumental mistake. Declaring war on humanity was not a display of strength. It was the first step in awakening a force that no species had fully understood. Humans were not simply fighters. They were survivors, planners, and tacticians on a level that the galaxy had never experienced. And as the Council began to feel the weight of its error, the humans continued, quietly and deliberately, moving forward in ways that would soon redefine the balance of power across the stars. The declaration of war, intended to intimidate, had achieved the opposite. It revealed the human strength, focus, and uncanny ability to survive and adapt. The galaxy was beginning to understand the dangerous truth. Humans were not just another species. They were the most deadly, not because they sought war, but because they had learned, through countless generations, to thrive where no one else could dot. And so, as Part 2 ends, the story is no longer just about a council making a decision. It is about the awakening of a species that the galaxy had underestimated for too long. A species that had survived the impossible, adapted beyond imagination, and would soon demonstrate that declaring war on humanity was the single greatest mistake the galaxy could ever make. By the time the galaxy began to understand the humans' quiet power, it was already too late. The Council had expected that after declaring war, the humans would either panic, retaliate in a small way, or at least send diplomats to negotiate. But humans were not like any other species. They did not react the way the Council expected, and that made them even more dangerous. From the outside, it looked like nothing was happening. Fleets remained in place. Colonies operated normally. Trade and research continued. Yet under the surface, humans were not idle. They were observing, analyzing, and preparing. Every movement of the Council and its allies was being noted. Every possible scenario was being considered. Humans had a way of thinking that combined instinct, experience, and careful planning. Where other species reacted emotionally, humans reacted rationally. Where others hesitated, humans adapted immediately. The first direct encounter came unexpectedly. A small Council patrol, tasked with monitoring the edge of human space, encountered a human fleet near a neutral system. The Council officers expected a fight, a display of aggression, or at least a message demanding they leave. What they got instead was confusion. The human fleet did not fire. It did not engage in aggressive maneuvers. Instead, it positioned itself to observe, to study, and to defend if necessary. The patrol, unsure of what to do, attempted to retreat. But every escape route seemed anticipated. Human ships moved with incredible precision, intercepting without harming, blocking without attacking. The patrol finally realized that this was not a fight humans wanted, but if pushed, they could control the situation completely. Every Council officer aboard that patrol reported the same thought. Humans did not fight like anyone else. They were unpredictable, disciplined, and terrifyingly effective without even using their full power. Back in the Council, reports like this began to spark fear and confusion. Analysts tried to model human behavior using old frameworks. Nothing worked. Humans were not predictable in the way other species were. They did not rely solely on technology, numbers, or brute force. Instead, they combined instinct, strategy, and adaptability in ways no one could fully understand. Every prediction failed. Every simulation collapsed when human variables were introduced. The more the Council tried to anticipate them, the more obvious it became. Humans could not be understood with conventional logic. Meanwhile, humans were quietly securing their positions. Colonies were reinforced with defensive systems designed to protect lives rather than destroy. Supply lines were optimized. Fleets were positioned not for aggressive strikes, but to respond instantly to any threat. They were ready to fight if attacked, but their preparation was about survival, not conquest. The difference was subtle but crucial. Humans were not acting out of pride, anger, or ambition. They were acting out of experience, knowing that survival sometimes required patience, observation, and precise action. In one remarkable instance, a Council fleet attempted a blockade of a human supply route. They expected humans to fight, to resist, to show aggression. What happened instead shocked them. Human ships appeared, not to attack, but to intercept and redirect the fleet safely away from civilian areas. No weapons were fired. No civilians were harmed. Yet the Council fleet was left completely blocked, unable to continue its mission, and forced to retreat. It was a demonstration of power without violence, a skill no other species had mastered. Word of these events spread quickly. Traders, explorers, and independent species began to whisper about humanity's abilities. Humans were no longer seen. As reckless survivors, they were recognized as something else entirely. A species capable of precise action, strategic thinking, and calm under pressure. They were deadly not because they sought war, but because they were prepared for any eventuality. The realization sent ripples of unease across the galaxy. Council members tried to respond. Plans were drawn, fleets were dispatched, and strategies were debated. But every move humans had made so far had already anticipated these responses. It was not arrogance. It was not luck. It was careful, thoughtful preparation. Humans had always expected the Council to underestimate them, and they had used that expectation to their advantage. Every step the Council took was already being accounted for. At the same time, the human perspective was simple. They were aware of the Council's actions, but they did not act out of fear or anger. They had learned from countless generations on a harsh planet that survival required focus, patience, and efficiency. Aggression without reason was pointless. Threats were met with readiness. Challenges were met with planning. Humans did not need to show off power. They simply acted, knowing that their understanding of survival and strategy was unmatched. Even the smaller species in the galaxy began to notice. Many had relied on Council authority for protection, believing that humans were just another species to be managed. Now, they watched in awe as humans moved like a single organism, each colony, ship, and team acting with purpose and precision. Humans did not seek to dominate others, but they could and would defend themselves in ways no one had imagined. The Council began to fear a truth it could not admit openly. Humans were not just capable of surviving, they were capable of mastering any challenge. Wars fought by other species relied on numbers, technology, or intimidation. Humans relied on adaptability, intelligence, and courage. They had survived disasters that would have destroyed entire civilizations. They had faced predators, famine, disease, and extreme environments. And now, in the vacuum of space, that same resilience and cunning made them unstoppable. For the humans themselves, these days were almost routine. Their fleets moved, their colonies functioned, and their scientists continued research. They made careful decisions, always aware of the larger picture. Every action was deliberate. Every choice had purpose. Humans were not reactive, they were proactive, thinking several steps ahead while observing the galaxy's mistakes. They did not seek glory, but they could not be underestimated. That was the lesson they were teaching the galaxy, without even trying. The first real confrontation, though minimal, would change everything. A Council fleet attempted to force entry into a human-controlled system. They expected resistance, expecting a battle that would be won by sheer force. What they found instead was something the galaxy had never seen. Human ships moved in perfect coordination, intercepting and redirecting the fleet, disabling weapons. Systems without firing a shot at the crews and neutralizing the threat efficiently. The fleet was forced to retreat, humiliated but unharmed. That event was the turning point. Every species in the galaxy began to understand what the Council had ignored for centuries. Humans were unpredictable because they were not driven by simple motives. They were not aggressive for power, greedy for territory, or reckless for glory. They were disciplined, focused, and adaptable. Every decision they made was rooted in experience, instinct, and careful thought. And that made them deadly. In ways no other species could measure. By the end of this phase, the Council was desperate. Every prediction had failed. Every plan had been anticipated. Analysts and strategists worked around the clock, trying to find a weakness. But humans had none, or at least none that could be exploited by conventional thinking. They were not just survivors. They were masters of adaptation, and the galaxy had underestimated them. The humans did not celebrate. They did not brag. They continued their work quietly, observing the galaxy while ensuring their own survival and the protection of their colonies. Their actions spoke for themselves. Every maneuver, every defensive setup, every strategic deployment demonstrated the unique combination of intelligence, experience, and instinct that had allowed humans to thrive on a death world. As Part 3 concludes, the galaxy begins to grasp a harsh reality. Humans are not predictable. Humans do not fight the way others do. Humans are not easily intimidated, outmaneuvered, or controlled. And the species that the Council declared war upon, the species it thought would be easily defeated, is quietly preparing to show the galaxy why underestimating them was the greatest mistake anyone could make. In essence, humans have already won the first battle without firing a single shot. The galaxy, once confident and dismissive, is now waking up to a dangerous truth. Declaring war on humans was not an act of control. It was the spark that would ignite a force no one could stop, a force shaped by survival, intelligence, and unparalleled adaptability. The galaxy was changing, and it was changing faster than the Council could handle. The humans, who had remained calm, quiet, and precise until now, were beginning to demonstrate the true scale of their capabilities. The Council had assumed that declaring war would force humans into predictable patterns: anger, retaliation, or surrender. What they did not anticipate was that humans never acted out of fear, pride, or revenge. They acted out of logic, preparation, and experience. For generations, humans had survived a world designed to kill them. From massive storms to vicious predators, humans had learned to adapt quickly, think strategically, and act decisively. They had survived situations where other species would have perished in minutes. That instinctive ability to adapt was now manifesting on a galactic level, and the Council was only beginning to understand its implications. It started with a neutral planet, located near the border of human space. The Council had sent envoys to negotiate a supposed truce, hoping that humans, faced with an opportunity for diplomacy, would accept a compromise. The envoys expected cautious discussion, perhaps even a minor show of power to reinforce their authority. Instead, they discovered something entirely different. Humans had anticipated their arrival. They had observed patterns, calculated probabilities, and prepared responses days, even weeks, in advance. The envoys were greeted not with hostility, but with precise guidance. Every question was answered, every concern addressed, yet behind the calm interactions, the humans' readiness was undeniable. Defensive systems were in place, supply lines secured, and escape routes monitored. Any threat could have been neutralized instantly, but it wasn't. Humans had prepared for conflict, but they preferred to avoid unnecessary destruction. The envoys left bewildered. Report back to the Council that humans were unlike any species they had ever encountered. They did not seek war, yet they were prepared for every possibility. They did not need to intimidate. They already commanded attention simply by being ready, disciplined, and adaptable. The Council, however, was slow to realize the significance. While the diplomats returned, the humans continued quietly reinforcing their position in space. Colonies were upgraded with defensive grids designed to protect civilians, not destroy attackers. Fleets moved with perfect coordination, ensuring that any incursion could be intercepted immediately. Supply lines were optimized to maintain efficiency, even under attack. Humans were not expanding recklessly. They were organizing, preparing, and calculating every step. Then came the first major display of their tactical genius. A Council fleet, confident in its superior numbers and advanced weapons, attempted a coordinated strike on several human outposts. The humans did not confront them head-on in the way other species might. Instead, they anticipated the fleet's movements. Defense systems activated in precise sequences, forcing the fleet to retreat. Without a single direct confrontation, ships that had expected to dominate the engagement were left immobilized or redirected, not destroyed, but rendered powerless. The outcome shocked the galaxy. Humans had proven they could neutralize threats efficiently without unnecessary destruction. Analysts struggled to understand what had happened. Traditional measures of military power numbers, firepower, or technology were meaningless against humans. They relied on prediction, adaptability, and instinct honed over centuries of survival. Every move the Council tried to make had been anticipated, and every response had already been accounted for. Meanwhile, humans continued to operate in what appeared to be ordinary, everyday routines. Colonies produced resources, research labs continued work, and fleets patrolled quietly. But beneath that calm exterior was a carefully orchestrated network of preparation. Humans were not acting aggressively, but every action was part of a larger strategy, ensuring survival, readiness, and control over their immediate space. The Council began to panic. Analysts warned that humans were not only surviving, they were thriving under pressure. Every attempt to provoke them had failed. Every strategic maneuver by the Council had been countered without violence. For the first time, the galaxy faced a species that could not be understood through conventional logic or past experience. Humans were unpredictable because they were not motivated by greed, pride, or emotion. They were motivated by survival, discipline, and foresight. Council members debated what to do next. Some advocated for immediate full-scale assault, hoping that overwhelming numbers would force humans into submission. Others suggested diplomacy, fearing that any escalation could lead to catastrophic losses. A few voices reminded the Council of humans' history, the Death World survivors who had endured every imaginable threat on their home planet. These warnings were largely ignored at first. But as reports of human efficiency and strategic brilliance continued to arrive, even the most confident members began to feel unease. Humans, meanwhile, did not rush to conflict. They did not celebrate their defensive victories. They acted calmly, steadily, and purposefully. Every fleet, every colony, every system was aligned with a single principle: readiness without recklessness. They were prepared to strike if necessary, but only as a response, never out of pride or aggression. This combination of patience, discipline, and adaptability was unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. Second major engagement further demonstrated humanity's capabilities. A coalition of species attempted to blockade a human-controlled system, believing that cutting off supplies would force humans to negotiate. The humans did not panic. Instead, they analyzed the situation, anticipated every possible move, and responded with flawless precision. Supply ships were rerouted, defensive measures were activated, and the blockading fleet found itself trapped in a carefully orchestrated sequence of maneuvers. Without firing a single shot at the crew, humans neutralized the blockade entirely. This event spread throughout the galaxy quickly. Traders, explorers, and smaller species began to whisper stories of humans who could control battles without violence, who could adapt to any situation, and who did not need to show off power to command. Respect. The Council's confidence eroded further. For the first time, members openly admitted that they had underestimated humans, and the fear was palpable. At the same time, humans continued to demonstrate another key trait: restraint. They could destroy fleets, neutralize threats, and control space with incredible efficiency, but they did not. Humans valued life, strategy, and long-term planning over immediate gratification. This restraint made them even more terrifying. They were not ruled by emotion. They were ruled by intelligence and foresight. Every action was deliberate, every choice measured, and every move part of a larger plan. Meanwhile, the Council grew, increasingly desperate. They sent more fleets, more envoys, and more intelligence operatives, hoping to understand or intimidate humanity. Each effort failed. Each attempt revealed the same truth. Humans were not just physically or technologically capable, they were intellectually and instinctively prepared for any challenge. They could adapt faster than the galaxy could anticipate, respond more effectively than any simulation had predicted, and think more creatively than any strategist had imagined. By now, humans were no longer just a species of interest. They were a force that the galaxy could not ignore. The Council had intended to declare war as a display of strength. Instead, they had awakened a species that had mastered survival, strategy, and adaptability. Every attempt to understand or predict humans failed, and every failed attempt only reinforced the growing realization that humans were far more dangerous than anyone had assumed. For the humans themselves, this phase of the conflict was almost routine. They did not see themselves as heroes, conquerors, or warriors. They saw themselves as survivors, as planners, as a species that could endure any threat and respond with intelligence, precision, and patience. They had faced countless challenges on their homeworld and in the galaxy, and they were prepared for whatever came next. As Part 4 comes to a close, the galaxy is faced with a terrifying reality. Humans are not aggressive, but they are deadly. They do not act recklessly, but they are unstoppable when provoked. They do not fight like any other species, and they do not make predictable mistakes. The Council, once confident and dismissive, now realizes that declaring war on humans was the beginning of a monumental miscalculation. Humans had shown the galaxy their true nature without firing a single shot. They were precise, adaptable, intelligent, and disciplined. The species that had survived a death world and mastered survival in unimaginable conditions was now demonstrating that their skills extended far beyond their home planet. And the Council, for the first time, understood that they had awakened a force that could not be ignored, controlled, or defeated easily. The galaxy was beginning to learn a lesson it would never forget. When humans act, it is not recklessness or emotion that drives them. It is experience, intelligence, and an instinct for survival that no other species can match. And that is what made them truly deadly. The galaxy had begun to realize something it could not have predicted. Humans were not just strong or intelligent, they were something else entirely. They did not fight like other species. They did not act out of fear, pride, or anger. They acted with precision, patience, and instinct, combining intelligence and experience in ways the galaxy had never seen. And now, the humans were ready to show why they were considered the deadliest species. It started quietly. Small fleets moved with incredible coordination, silently securing human-controlled systems, fortifying colonies, and establishing supply lines. Humans did not broadcast their intentions. They did not flaunt power. Every action was calculated, every movement deliberate. To the Council and other species, it seemed like nothing was happening, but in reality, humans were setting the stage for a display that would change the galaxy forever. The first major engagement that could not be ignored involved a border system near Council-controlled space. A coalition of alien species had attempted to pressure humans, hoping to force them into negotiation. They sent a fleet large enough to overwhelm any single human system. They expected resistance, fear, or even a hasty retreat. Instead, what they encountered was a calculated response that left them stunned. Human ships did not charge blindly. They did not attack with rage or desperation. Instead, they moved with precision, intercepting the fleet at strategic points, cutting supply lines, and disabling weapon systems without harming crews unnecessarily. Within hours, the coalition fleet was rendered ineffective. They could not advance, could not retreat, and could not communicate effectively because humans had already disrupted their systems with non-lethal but highly effective tactics. The result was astonishing. Humans had neutralized a fleet far larger than their own without firing a single shot at its personnel. Reports of the engagements spread like wildfire. Even the smallest species, long used to the dominance of the Council, began to take notice. Humans were not aggressive conquerors. They were calculated, disciplined, and terrifyingly efficient. Every move demonstrated intelligence, adaptability, and patience. Traits, however, every attempt to counter human movements failed. Every strategy had been anticipated. Every fleet sent against humans returned with reports of defeat or near failure. Analysts tried to model human behavior, but nothing worked. Humans did not follow predictable patterns. They did not rely solely on technology, numbers, or force. They relied on instinct and experience, the kind of survival skills that could not be replicated by any artificial intelligence or military. Algorithm. In the midst of this, humans displayed a quality that made them even more dangerous: restraint. They could have destroyed fleets, annihilated colonies, and conquered entire systems within days, but they did not. Humans did not fight to dominate. They fought to survive, to protect, and to ensure that any conflict was managed efficiently and precisely. This restraint was terrifying to other species. They realized that humans could do far more if they ever chose to, and that made every interaction with them unpredictable and dangerous. The turning point came when a council fleet attempted to blockade a major human colony. They expected panic, chaos, and surrender. But humans had already predicted every possible scenario. Ships moved into precise positions, supply lines were rerouted, and defensive systems were activated at the perfect moment. Within, the blockade failed, not because humans had superior numbers or firepower, but because they had anticipated every move and had already prepared countermeasures. News of these events spread quickly. Traders, explorers, and independent species began sharing stories of human efficiency, discipline, and strategic brilliance. One report described a fleet appearing where sensors had predicted nothing, intercepting a threat without firing a shot. Another spoke of a colony surviving an attack that would have destroyed any other species. These stories fueled a growing fear across the galaxy. Humans were no longer just survivors. They were masters of strategy, adaptation, and survival. Council tried to respond, but the more they acted, the more apparent it became. Humans were not just capable, they were unbeatable in ways no one had imagined. Every fleet sent against them failed. Every attempt to negotiate or intimidate was anticipated and countered. Analysts and strategists admitted, often in private, that humans had no real weaknesses that could be exploited by conventional means. Meanwhile, humans continued their work quietly. Colonies produced resources. Fleets patrolled and observed. Scientists and engineers developed new systems, not for war, but to ensure continued survival and readiness. Every human action had purpose. Every choice was deliberate. They were preparing for the long-term, not short-term glory. And yet, even in their calm preparation, humans demonstrated a level of power and efficiency that terrified every species in the young galaxy. Another critical moment came when humans responded to an attempt to infiltrate one of their systems. A coalition of spies and sabotage teams had planned to disrupt human operations, but humans anticipated every move. Security systems detected the intruders before they could act. Containment protocols neutralized threats without unnecessary harm, and the entire operation was foiled. By the time the infiltrators realized what had happened, humans had already secured the system and restored order. It was another demonstration of patience, precision, and adaptability. For the smaller species and neutral observers, it was a lesson in humility. Humans were not reckless warriors or mindless aggressors. They were intelligent, disciplined, and capable of controlling situations far beyond the understanding of other species. The galaxy had assumed humans could be threatened or intimidated. They could not. Humans acted on logic, preparation, and instinct qualities that no other species had truly mastered. The Council, meanwhile, began to panic. Every attempt to predict human action failed. Every fleet sent against humans returned, with embarrassing or alarming results. Diplomats found themselves outmaneuvered without even leaving their ships. Analysts admitted privately that humans were simply too unpredictable, too intelligent, and too adaptable for the galaxy to handle using conventional strategies. The realization was terrifying. Declaring war on humans had not weakened them. It had revealed a force that no one could easily control. In the midst of this, humans maintained their calm. They did not gloat. They did not seek revenge. They did not act out of pride. Instead, they continued their work quietly, moving forward, with precision and focus. Every decision had purpose. Every fleet, colony, and system was aligned with a single principle: readiness without recklessness. Humans were prepared for war, but they preferred to act only when necessary. That combination of patience, discipline, and power made them more dangerous than any species that relied solely on force or intimidation. The final lesson of this phase was clear to the galaxy. Humans were the deadliest species, not because they sought conflict, but because they had mastered survival in a way no other species could. They were intelligent, adaptable, disciplined, and capable of acting with precision under pressure. They could have destroyed entire fleets and colonies, but they chose restraint. They could have dominated the Council, but they sought efficiency and survival instead. And that made them not just deadly, but unstoppable in ways no one could predict. By the end of this phase, the Council and the galaxy at large were forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. Humans were not just survivors. They were planners, strategists, and masters of adaptation. Every move was calculated. Every action was deliberate. Every response was precise. The species that had survived at Deathworld and mastered hardship on a planetary scale had now proven itself capable of controlling the flow of events across an entire galaxy. And yet, humans did not celebrate. They did not gloat. They continued to act calmly, quietly, and efficiently. They had proven their strength without unnecessary destruction. They had neutralized threats without unnecessary violence. They had outmaneuvered the most powerful council the galaxy had ever known without showing arrogance or malice. Humans were not only the deadliest species, they were the species that had shown restraint, intelligence, and precision in ways the galaxy had never seen. As Part 5 ends, the galaxy is forced to admit a truth it can no longer ignore, declaring, war on humans was not just a mistake, it was the beginning of a revelation. The species that had been underestimated for centuries had revealed its true nature. They were intelligent, adaptable, disciplined, and deadly. And the Council, along with every other species, now realized that humans were not a species to be trifled with, underestimated, or provoked. The lesson was clear. Humans were not just powerful. They were precise, they were efficient, and they were unstoppable when prepared. The galaxy had awakened a force that could not be controlled, predicted, or defeated using conventional means. And humanity, true to its nature, had shown that it was not interested in conquest. It was interested in survival, strategy, and proving that no species, no matter how powerful, could underestimate them without dire consequences. After years of observing, testing, and underestimating humans, the galaxy was finally forced to acknowledge the undeniable truth. Humans were not just survivors. They were a species that combined intelligence, adaptability, and patience with an instinct for survival that no other species could match. Every engagement, every maneuver, and every decision humans had made up to this point had demonstrated their precision, strategic brilliance, and calculated restraint. And now, the galaxy faced the consequences of having declared war on them. For the Council, the situation had reached a tipping point. Their fleets had been neutralized, their strategies anticipated, and their diplomats outmaneuvered. Even their most advanced sensors and predictive algorithms failed to provide an accurate understanding of human actions. The Council had believed that fear, threats, or superior numbers could control humans. Instead, they had awakened a force that operated beyond fear, beyond conventional logic, and beyond expectation. Panic and frustration rippled through the Council chambers as leaders realized they had no reliable means of predicting human behavior. Humans, however, remained calm. Their fleets patrolled silently, their colonies continued to operate efficiently, and their people worked with quiet focus. There was no arrogance. There was no unnecessary violence. Every step taken by humans was deliberate, measured, and aimed at maintaining security while demonstrating capability. The galaxy had learned that humans did not need to strike to prove power. They only needed to be prepared, disciplined, and adaptable. In one remarkable demonstration, humans responded to a council fleet attempting to pressure a border system. The fleet expected conflict. They expected resistance. Instead, they encountered a carefully orchestrated set of maneuvers that neutralized their advances without a single direct confrontation. Ships were rerouted, weapon systems disabled temporarily, and supply lines carefully blocked all without endangering the lives of the crew. The result was complete control of the situation with minimal effort. The Council was humiliated, not by brute force, but by intelligence and foresight. Smaller species across the galaxy watched in awe. For centuries, they had assumed that survival relied on sheer numbers, superior technology, or aggressive tactics. Humans had demonstrated a different model: strategic patience, coordinated intelligence, and adaptability, born from necessity. Even the most technologically advanced species recognized that no matter how much they tried, humans could anticipate, adapt, and overcome challenges in ways no one else could. The Council convened an emergency session, realizing that their options were rapidly diminishing. For the first time, species that had relied on Council authority for protection were openly questioning its effectiveness. Humans had proven that authority and intimidation could not contain them. If anything, attempts to dominate only revealed the full extent of their capabilities. The galaxy began to understand what the Council had failed to grasp. Humans were not only powerful, they were fundamentally different. In response, a small delegation from the Council attempted to negotiate peace. They arrived cautiously, knowing that any misstep could trigger a reaction they were unprepared for. What they found was, once again, surprising. Humans did not respond with aggression. They did not gloat. They listened carefully, assessed the intentions of the delegates, and spoke clearly, logically, and firmly. Every word demonstrated the same principles that had guided them for generations: focus, preparation, and the discipline to act only when necessary. The negotiations were enlightening for the Council. Humans made it clear that they did not seek conflict, domination, or revenge. Their priority was survival and security, combined with a clear understanding of their own capabilities. The humans emphasized that they would respond decisively to any threat, but they preferred diplomacy, cooperation, and strategic foresight whenever possible. Their calm, precise communication left the delegates both impressed and intimidated. As discussions continued, it became evident that the humans held the advantage. They had demonstrated their strength through years of precise preparation, strategic responses, and adaptability. The Council had underestimated them at every turn. Every fleet that had attempted to intimidate, every blockade that had tried to contain, every strategy that had sought to predict human behavior had failed. Humans had proven themselves capable of controlling the outcome of any engagement, while maintaining moral and ethical restraint. The final agreement was clear and firm. Humans would remain autonomous, their borders respected, and their sovereignty acknowledged. In return, they offered to cooperate, share knowledge, and participate in galactic affairs on their own terms. The Council, though reluctant, had no choice. They had seen the evidence firsthand. Humans were not a species to be controlled, intimidated, or underestimated. Declaring war had been a catastrophic error, and now they had to accept the reality that humans would set the terms. Across the galaxy, the impact of humans' actions became widely understood. Traders, explorers, and smaller species began to speak of humans with a mixture of respect, awe, and caution. Stories circulated of fleets neutralizing threats without casualties, colonies surviving impossible attacks, and humans demonstrating adaptability that no one else could match. The reputation of humanity had grown from underestimated survivors to the deadliest, most capable species in the galaxy, not because they sought violence, but because their preparation, intelligence, and instinctive adaptability made them unstoppable when necessary. Even after the formal negotiations, humans continued their work with calm focus. Colonies operated efficiently, fleets patrolled intelligently, and research continued unabated. They had proven their point. They had demonstrated that they could control outcomes across entire sectors of space without unnecessary aggression. And yet, they did not rest on their achievements. Humans remained vigilant, prepared, and adaptable, knowing that survival and readiness were ongoing responsibilities. The Council learned a hard lesson. Declaring war on humans had been a monumental mistake. They had underestimated a species that could think, adapt, and survive in ways no one else could. They had assumed that power, intimidation, or numerical advantage would ensure compliance. Instead, they had awakened a species that could anticipate, outmaneuver, and neutralize threats efficiently and with restraint. For the first time, the galaxy realized that humans were not just another species. They were a force defined by intelligence, discipline, and resilience. By the end of this phase, humans had secured their place in the galaxy. They had demonstrated their power, their discipline, and their strategic brilliance. They had earned respect, not through conquest, but through preparation, adaptability, and decisive action. The Council, though still powerful, had been forced to acknowledge that humans were no longer a species to be underestimated, provoked, or challenged without consequence. The galaxy had learned a final, unshakable truth. Humans were not aggressive conquerors. They were disciplined, intelligent, and patient. They were capable of unmatched strategy and adaptability. They were deadly not because they sought war, but because they had mastered survival and could respond with precision and intelligence when necessary. And in proving this, humans had rewritten the rules of engagement across the galaxy. In the quiet aftermath, humans continued their work. Colonies thrived, fleets maintained vigilance, and scientists explored new frontiers. They did not boast of victories. They did not seek domination. They acted with intelligence, patience, and purpose. And as the galaxy watched, every species understood that humans were not to be underestimated ever again. Declaring war on humans had been a mistake the Council would never forget. The lesson was clear. Humans were the deadliest species, not because they sought power or violence, but because they had survived the impossible, adapted beyond expectation, and mastered the art of precision, intelligence, and resilience. The galaxy had awakened to a new reality. Humanity was no longer a participant to be managed. It was a force to be reckoned with. And so, the humans had emerged victorious, not through aggression, but through patience, strategy, and unmatched skill. They had proven that survival, intelligence, and adaptability were the ultimate forms of power. The galaxy had learned the hard way that humans were the deadliest species of all, and that lesson would never be forgotten.